Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, first published in 1975, is one of the foundational texts in the field of animal ethics and has been widely credited with launching the modern animal rights movement. Often dubbed the Bible of animal rights activism, the book is a forceful and accessible philosophical treatise against speciesism, the idea that belonging to a particular species, in this case the human species, is a legitimate reason for giving greater moral consideration to one's interests over the comparable interests of non-human animals. Singer, an Australian philosopher and a key figure in the tradition of utilitarianism, bases his arguments on the ethical framework developed by Jeremy Bentham and furthered by John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism evaluates the rightness or wrongness of actions based on the consequences they produce, aiming to maximize overall happiness or minimize suffering. For Singer, this core idea has radical implications when extended beyond the human species. Speciesism and moral equality. At the heart of animal liberation is the concept of speciesism, a term Singer adopts and popularizes to refer to an unjustifiable bias in favor of one's own species. He draws an analogy between speciesism and other forms of discrimination such as racism or sexism. Just as racism disregards the interests of individuals based on race and sexism based on gender, speciesism disregards or downplays the suffering of non-human animals based solely on their species membership. Singer argues that what matters morally is not what an individual is, e.g., a dog, a cow, a human, but how that individual can suffer or experience well-being. The capacity for suffering, not intelligence or rationality, is the morally relevant criterion. As Singer writes, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer, quoting Bentham's famous dictum. Therefore, any being capable of suffering deserves moral consideration. To privilege human suffering over animal suffering without relevant justification is, for Singer, an ethically indefensible form of prejudice. The ethics of eating animals. One of the most impactful parts of animal liberation is its critique of modern industrial animal agriculture. Singer provides graphic descriptions of the living conditions in factory farms where billions of animals are confined in cramped spaces, deprived of natural behaviors, and subjected to procedures such as debeaking, tail docking, or castration without anesthesia. Chickens, pigs, and cows are treated not as sentient beings, but as production units. Singer doesn't simply rely on emotional appeals. He argues logically that if we reject speciesism, then the suffering inflicted on animals in these facilities is a serious moral wrong. He challenges the reader. If you wouldn't accept this level of suffering being inflicted on a human for a trivial benefit, why accept it when the victims are animals? Importantly, Singer does not argue that eating animals is always wrong per se. He adopts a utilitarian stance, which means he evaluates each situation based on the consequences. For instance, if one could consume animal products without causing suffering, e.g. roadkill or lab-grown meat, the ethical objection would be weaker. But given the reality of modern animal agriculture, Singer concludes that the consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy is almost always morally indefensible. Animal experimentation. Another target of Singer's criticism is the use of animals in scientific research, especially in cases where the potential benefit is marginal or speculative. He acknowledges that not all animal research is frivolous, and he is willing to consider the trade-offs involved in experiments that could significantly reduce human suffering. However, Singer highlights how many experiments are redundant, cause extreme suffering, or are driven by curiosity rather than necessity. Singer introduces the equal consideration of interests principle. According to this principle, similar interests should be given similar weight, regardless of species. Thus, the pain experienced by a monkey in a lab experiment should be taken as seriously as comparable pain experienced by a human. While some defend animal experimentation by arguing that humans are more intelligent, Singer counters that intelligence does not determine the capacity for suffering, and thus cannot serve as the moral justification. He also exposes institutional incentives that perpetuate animal experimentation, such as government funding, lack of oversight, and academic inertia. Singer calls for both legal reform and moral reevaluation of the scientific community's priorities. Critiques of traditional animal welfare. Singer makes a crucial distinction between animal welfare and animal liberation. While animal welfare advocates seek to improve the conditions in which animals are used, animal liberationists aim to abolish practices that treat animals as mere tools for human ends. For Singer, reforms that merely reduce suffering without questioning the underlying exploitation do not go far enough. He criticizes humane societies and animal welfare organizations that, in his view, compromise too much with the status quo. Their incrementalism, he argues, often ends up legitimizing practices that should be abolished altogether. For Singer, ethical consistency requires more radical change, not just bigger cages, but empty ones. Practical implications. Vegetarianism and activism. Singer is not content to leave the discussion at the level of abstract theory. One of the enduring strengths of animal liberation is its practical urgency. Singer concludes that adopting a vegetarian, or better, vegan, lifestyle is one of the most immediate and effective ways individuals can reduce unnecessary animal suffering. He addresses potential objections, concerns about nutrition, culture, convenience, or personal preference. While acknowledging these factors, he argues that they do not outweigh the moral cost of supporting industries that institutionalize animal cruelty. Singer's book has been profoundly influential in shaping the choices of countless individuals, encouraging them to reevaluate their consumption habits. Beyond personal diet, animal liberation also calls for broader systemic change, including legislative action, public awareness campaigns, and corporate accountability. Reception and legacy. When Animal Liberation was first published in the mid-1970s, it was a controversial and groundbreaking work. While some dismissed it as extremist, many others recognized its rigorous philosophical foundation and its transformative potential. Over the decades, the book has been translated into dozens of languages and sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Singer's arguments helped fuel the rise of animal rights organizations such as PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and the spread of vegetarian and vegan movements across the globe. He also influenced the development of animal law as a legal field and contributed to philosophical debates on personhood, moral status, and the scope of ethical community. Critics of Singer have raised various objections, some philosophical, some practical. Critics from within the animal rights camp, such as Tom Regan, argue that Singer's utilitarianism is insufficient because it does not recognize inherent rights or dignity. Regan, for instance, believes animals are subjects of a life and thus have intrinsic rights, independent of the consequences of harming them. Others have pointed out that Singer's utilitarianism could theoretically justify sacrificing some animals or even humans, if doing so would produce greater overall happiness, a counterintuitive consequence for many readers. Singer has responded by emphasizing that his version of utilitarianism is sensitive to long-term effects, including the erosion of trust and social norms. Conclusion. Animal liberation remains a milestone in ethical philosophy and social activism. Peter Singer's careful reasoning, paired with compelling examples and a call to action, has had a profound effect on how we think about animals, suffering, and moral responsibility. The book challenges comfortable assumptions, confronts deeply entrenched practices, and asks readers to expand their circle of moral concern. Singer's enduring message is clear. If we accept that suffering is bad, regardless of who experiences it, then we must also accept that the vast suffering we inflict on animals, for food, science, or entertainment, is a moral issue of the highest order. To ignore this is not only to fail animals, but to fail our own ethical potential.